Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. Take a look at this image. Cuneiform scholars have labeled it VA243. That's an abbreviation of the museum in Berlin that it's in, but this isn't sort of a trivia contest. What I want you to notice is there are three figures in this seal image. It's Sumerian, Mesopotamian material, and the two figures on your left, okay, the two leftmost figures have something interesting in between the two heads. Is that the sun? And if it's the sun, are those planets around the sun? Well, there are a lot of people who think so, and this cylinder seal has given rise to something called Nibiru, the belief in 12 planets, an extra planet, also known as Planet X. Is this legitimate? Is this really what this seal describes and depicts? Well, let's find out. Anyone familiar with the television show Ancient Aliens, or just generally internet conspiracy talk about the end of the world, will recognize the terms Nibiru and Planet X. The two names are actually interchangeable. They refer to allegedly a rogue planetary object on a collision course with Earth, roughly in the 21st century, which would of course be this century. Where does this come from? Where do we get this term Nibiru? Because it's kind of an odd term, and why would Nibiru be called Planet X? Well, the answer to that is Zecharia Sitchin. In his famous book that sold millions and millions of copies, The 12th Planet, Sitchin used that cylinder seal and his sort of understanding, I don't want to say translation because he's not really translating tablets, but his understanding of certain cuneiform tablets to articulate the idea that the ancient Sumerians believed that there was an extra planet that we just don't know about. Now, you say, well, how did they get that? Well, it's true that in antiquity, the ancients thought of the sun and the moon as sort of the same kind of object as the planets that we would think of today. So if you look back at the cylinder seal and you assume that the object in the center is the sun, and then you count the dots around it, you actually have 11 dots plus the sun would be 12. Now, that number's significant, 12 planets. If you go by the counting that we use now, we only have 9 planets plus sun and moon. We would only have a total of 11. Therefore, if you're buying what Sitchin is selling, you have 12 planets, which means you have an extra one. And that extra planet has been referred to as Planet X. Now, in Sitchin's system, he gives a name to this extra planet. He refers to it as Nibiru. Now, here on Fringe Pop, we've talked about the myth of the Anunnaki before, and how the idea of Nibiru being a rogue planet associated with the Anunnaki aliens is in fact a myth. You don't actually ever read, for instance, a cuneiform tablet that associates the Anunnaki, which were a group of gods in Sumerian religion, with the term Nibiru or any other planet that the Sumerians would have known about. That doesn't stop Sitchin or ancient alien theorists. This is where the idea comes from and how it gets articulated. This cylinder seal, so the theory goes, has the sun with 11 planets for a total of 12, meaning there's one extra one out there that's a mystery that astronomers today have not detected. And according to ancient alien theory, this rogue planet is due, by virtue of its orbit, to show up near Earth in the 21st century and possibly to collide with it and end the world. So how do we evaluate these sorts of claims? Well, you came to the right place. That's what we're here to do. Now, before we get into the details, I want to make sure that we understand again what the claims are. Zecharia Sitchin claims that this cylinder seal produced by some Sumerian artist, way back thousands and thousands of years ago, describes the sun and 11 planetary bodies for a total of 12. So we have an extra planet. And Sitchin says that this extra planet is called Nibiru in the Mesopotamian, the cuneiform tablets. So he's assigning these ideas to primary sources. At least that's the way it sounds. Cylinder seal, cuneiform tablets. We have Nibiru being a mystery planet beyond Pluto. Again, this is something our astronomers in contemporary terms have never sighted, never seen. It's just way out there. So he's ascribing these ideas to primary texts. I also mentioned this was the home planet, so the story goes, of the Anunnaki, and it's cycling through our solar system. According to Zecharia Sitchin, this happens every 3,600 years, and it is now on a collision course for Earth. So hold that in your mind. You've got the claims now, and the claims are supposedly attached to primary source material. That's what we're going to take a look at next. Let's focus first on the question of Sumerian or Mesopotamian knowledge of astronomy. Believe it or not, there are a lot, as in tens of thousands, a lot of astronomical tablets, cuneiform tablets that contain some sort of information about astronomy. They have been thoroughly studied and published. There aren't any secret ones out there. You can buy very expensive academic books where everything has been translated, laid out very nicely by people who not only have a knowledge of cuneiform, but also a very sound knowledge of astronomy. This whole area, cuneiform astronomy, Sumerian astronomy, is actually a major academic focus within the field of Mesopotamian studies. Now, for example, there are some texts that are more important than others. Some are called star catalogs by scholars. These are essentially compendia, kind of a bulk information about naked eye astronomical observation. Sumerian and Akkadian names of stars and constellations are listed in these so-called star catalogs. And the information goes all the way back to the 3rd millennium BC, again 3000 BC, all the way into the early centuries AD. So it covers a long period of history, and it's very detailed. Another very important text is something called 3 Stars Each. Now essentially, this concerns calendars related to the tradition of the astronomical year, at least as known by the Mesopotamians. They had a year of 360 days. The purpose of the 3 Stars Each information, again, these tablets, was to identify stars that rose each month on 3 paths, hence the 3 stars each. So they are listings of the stars that rise each month on certain trajectories through certain regions of the sky. They're named Ea, Anu, and Enlil in honor of Sumerian gods. As such, they list 36-month stars, one for each path every month. Now that's going to become important in a moment. This idea about stars following certain paths according to certain months. Hold on to that thought, because it's going to come back to us in a way that will help us really evaluate the claims of Zecharia Sitchin when it comes to Nibiru. Another important text, tablet series on Mesopotamian, Sumerian, and so forth, these different civilizations from Mesopotamia, their astronomical knowledge is called the Mul Apin, that's M-U-L, and then a dot, A-P-I-N. It's Sumerian for plow star. This is actually a catalog of 71 stars and constellations of the 3 ways of the 3 stars each tradition. So in other words, the stars in this particular text have some relationship to, they show up in that other tablet series that I mentioned, the 3 stars each. Now by way of sample information, Mul Apin has pairs of constellations which rise and set simultaneously. Again, the Sumerian, Mesopotamian astronomers would notice these things and record it in a text like this one. They note the time intervals between the dates of the heliacal risings of stars. The heliacal rising is when a star appears just over the horizon when the sun is coming up. And then you also have planets and the durations of their solar conjunctions. So this is just a sample. They record lots of other things, but this is naked eye astronomy, and it's really well done. It's very detailed. The Mesopotamian astronomers really had an eye for detail, and they record many, many details that really help us assess what they knew about the night sky or the day sky as well. They also record stellar risings and planetary positions for predicting weather. It's very detailed again. They knew a lot about what they were looking at. They kept very detailed records. And again, there are thousands of tablets that say something about astronomical events and knowledge. So these were not amateurs. Again, the people who created these tablets knew what they were doing, they devoted their lives to it, and they recorded detailed information. Now, why am I emphasizing that? Well, you'll find out in a minute. So what do cuneiform astronomical tablets tell us that's relevant to our subject matter, Nibiru, this allegedly rogue planet? Well, Nibiru is actually specifically mentioned several times in the astronomical material from Mesopotamia. It is associated with the planet Jupiter, the planet Mercury, and it's also generically referred to as a star. Now in 2015, we got a little more information. There was a publication in the CDLI newsletter, that's the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative. So it's very recent, and the writer there noted that the name Nibiru could be assigned to any visible astronomical object that marks an equinox. So we have a bit of information here. We've got the term associated with an equinox, it's a generic star, it's associated with Jupiter, it's associated with Mercury. Another astrolabe includes Nibiru, and this is important, showing up annually. Now think about that. We've got a bunch of planets associated with Nibiru, but the planets get names. There's no reference to any planet beyond Pluto that's called Nibiru in the actual texts. We also get this notation that Nibiru shows up every year in some way. How in the world can we take the information that's actually in the tablets and align it with what Zechariah Sitchin is saying? Well, the short answer is we can't. Zechariah Sitchin was essentially making up his information about Nibiru. He doesn't give you the references in the tablets for what the Sumerians actually said about this object and how they used this term. But it gets even worse than that. If you look at all of the cuneiform astronomical tablets and you essentially write down every time a planet is observed and named, you don't get any reference to any planet beyond Saturn. That's what they knew. And you say, well, why Saturn? Because they're doing naked eye astronomy. That is the farthest limit of naked eye astronomy when it comes to observing planets. They do not know of any planet beyond Saturn. So by definition, they do not know of a planet beyond Pluto. It just isn't in the primary sources. Again, these are all implications of what actually happens when you look at the primary source material. And here at Fringe Pop 321, this is what we try to do. We'll take a claim and we'll assess it against the primary source material. There is no planet X in the cuneiform tablets. There is no planet beyond Pluto. What you have is no planet beyond Saturn mentioned, and then you have Nibiru associated with all sorts of other things. Again, not a planet beyond Pluto, or not a planet associated with the Anunnaki. It never happens in the texts. There is no 3,600-year orbit. The Sumerians did not telegraph the fact that we have a rogue planet out there on its way, ready to crash into Earth sometime in the 21st century. These are modern myths. Now this brings us to an obvious question. If the Sumerians and Mesopotamian civilization after Sumer that produced all of this astronomical information in the tablets, if they didn't know of any planet beyond Pluto, what's up with that cylinder seal that we started the episode with? What's up with VA243? Well, we need to take a closer look at that. If we look at the cylinder seal closely, you'll see on the left-hand side, to the left of the standing man, there is Sumerian. There's text on this cylinder seal. There's one vertical column of Sumerian markings, Sumerograms on the left. And on the right, next to the, or behind the seated deity, you actually have a few more vertical columns of text. These are Sumerograms. Now, believe it or not, they actually say something. Now, you might be led to think by what you see on Ancient Aliens that, well, boy, I'll bet there's something written on here that tells us about the 12 planets. Actually, that would not be the case. And we have a situation here where we have Sumerian material, we can read it, it's been translated, so let's just do that and clear that up. You might, if you have a good eye, looking at the seal, notice that the vertical column all the way to the left and the vertical column all the way to the right are identical. They actually say the same thing, and then the other two columns are different. What do they say? Well, we actually don't get a whole lot of information here that's interesting. We have the first line that says in Sumerian, Dub-si-ga, which is a proper name, Dub-si-ga, somebody's name. Okay? Glad it's not mine. Then you have another line, Ili-il-la'at, Ili-ilat. It's another proper name, another name I'm glad I don't have. And then the third line, the third distinct combination is the word for your servant. So basically you have one person giving someone a seal to another person, and they include the phrase, your servant. So it was probably a gift or denotes the giving of a gift. Again, it's not very interesting, it's not very exciting, but here's the point. It doesn't say anything about 12 planets. So that leaves us with the remaining question of, well, what does that iconography mean? What does the picture mean? Because it sure looks like the sun with planets around it. What's up with that? Now, the key to this whole discussion is a certain assumption. If we look at the cylinder seal one more time, again, the figures to the left, between them, we have what looks to our eye like the sun. Zecharia Sitchin assumed that this was, in fact, the sun. And that led him, again, to count the dots around it and come up with this theory. Well, there's just one problem. This is not the way in Sumerian art that they would depict the sun. It's not the sun. The usual sun iconography includes wavy lines. So you could have a circle with or without points, and the important element is with or without points, it'll have wavy lines, almost like giving off heat. That is the way a Sumerian would draw, would depict in artwork the sun. Our cylinder seal sign, our symbol, does not have the wavy lines. It is not the sun. And so Sitchin's assumption from the get-go was wrong. Now we can see other examples of this, and there are actually many in Sumerian, Mesopotamian art. Here's an interesting one. I particularly like it because we have examples side by side of the moon on the left. You can see it has a crescent moon, very easy to pick out the iconographical meaning of that. In the middle we have the sun. We have a pointed object, but it has the wavy lines. It's consistent. And then right next to that we have something that looks a little bit similar to what we actually see on the seal. It's a circular object with pointed arms, as it were, but no wavy lines. It only has points. That's typical iconography for stars. Now, VA243, our cylinder seal, has that symbol, the symbol that we would associate typically if we knew Mesopotamian art, with a star or stars. That's what we actually see on the cylinder seal. The dots, therefore, would not be planets because we don't have a sun. You don't have planets orbiting stars, just random stars. But let's take it a little further. Even if we assumed that Sitchin was right, even if we assumed wrongly that this was the sun, the positions of the dots around his alleged sun don't make any astronomical sense. If you look at their size, there are big ones and there's little ones. You would think the big ones are planets like Jupiter or Saturn. Their position around this alleged sun object is wrong. They're in the wrong celestial position if indeed they depict those planets. So no matter how you look at it, there are mistakes about identifying this iconography on the seal with the sun and then a whole collection of planets. Now, what we covered in this episode is material that I can personally comment on because of my training. I have a PhD in ancient Semitic languages, and so this is material that I'm familiar with. We've really been critiquing the idea of Nibiru as a rogue planet or 12th planet based upon cuneiform material, cuneiform tablet data. I'm not an astronomer. If you want the astronomical reasons for why there is no Planet X, why that is a myth, check out the Pseudo-Astronomy podcast of Dr. Stuart Robbins. He has done a whole series on Planet X mythologies, and Stuart has his PhD in Martian geology. Okay, he knows his astronomy really well, and he's taken the time to critique the Planet X Nibiru idea from the standpoint of his own expertise. He has a whole series of podcasts on it. For the material discussed here, please check out the episode website for source materials and scholarly studies on cuneiform astronomy. It's a lot of material, and it's all accessible and available. Thanks for watching Fringe Pop 321. We will see you again. Please come back and watch more episodes because what you know may not be so.